Um, so this is our fourth week, and so my hope is on these fourth weeks we'll do something a little bit different for multiple reasons. A lot of it is so it gives me kind of a break from going through kind of the hard Exodus work, because I probably nerd out way too much when I outline things, and now with different Sunday school things, I've not caught up through the book of Matthew yet. So my hope on these fourth weeks is we'll be able to do special topics. And that might mean doing a catch-up in case we miss 1 week to stay on that schedule I had made it at the beginning. Or today we'll do something a little different. So today we're going to look at the wisdom books and more specifically at Proverbs. So what my hope to do today is I want to share, I think I have 5 different videos that I put in our presentation if we want to look at them. And they're videos that I find really helpful. And there's 3 of them I will play, and 2 we can look at if we do want to play. Or 3 I really, really want to play. I'll say it like that. And then my other hope for us is that we can look at the wisdom books and learn what that is and why it's special, as well as looking at the Proverbs together, and maybe you might share a proverb that is special with you, or a way Proverbs have kind of affected your life. Marcia, I saw your hand move. Was that a twitch or a?
Must have been a twitch.
Okay, all right. I thought you wanted to share a proverb. So before we move into the presentation, I want to tell you about one reason why the Proverbs are special for me. So the Proverbs were my dad's favorite book of the Bible, and so when we were young kids, every day of the month, we were supposed to read one of the Proverbs, because there's 31 Proverbs, and so we would read every day one of the Proverbs, and then we would talk about them together. And so we didn't do that all the time, but there was a season where I read a lot of Proverbs. And as a kid, my favorite Proverbs was Proverb 12:1, which I just want to read to you. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but those who hate it to be rebuked are stupid. That was my favorite verse as a kid because it said stupid. And it felt like I had a reason that I could say that. But a lot of the Proverbs are very short, little quirky statements like that. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but those who hate to be rebuked are stupid. That's pretty simple. But there's other Proverbs that are more elaborate. So you might know Proverbs 31. Does anyone know Proverbs 31?
King Lemuel? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, yeah. Strange. This is the Lady Wisdom that talks about. So like verse 10, a capable wife who can find. She is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her. He will have no lack of gain. So it goes through a proverb talking about like the woman that you want, but it's about wisdom. It's a personification of wisdom. It's one of the more popular Proverbs. But it's more than those little quirky statements. It's a whole kind of chapter on the same theme.
So was the word wisdom a female word in Greek? Is that why they refer to wisdom as a female?
I wonder, I am not sure if in Hebrew wisdom is feminine, but personified Lady Wisdom, I think is something that spans multiple cultures, but I'm not sure. I don't know that for sure.
Yeah, I just wondered why they gave wisdom the female.
I don't know. I don't know that one.
But isn't that figure when she holds justice?
Right, but
It's a female.
Where did that originate?
Wisdom,
Why?
exactly, the
Yeah,
scales.
back.
I know in Greek,
Originated, why?
wisdom is Sophia, which is definitely feminine, and one of the videos we're going to say is going to have the Hebrew word for wisdom, but I don't know it off the cuff. Is there any proverb that might have been special to you or you wanted to share? Do y'all have the same Bible? Why is yours so colorful?
Mine's the Rainbow Study Bible, given to me by a friend.
Okay.
And it's fully color-coded with all sorts of, what Jesus says in one called God's in purple, and Jesus said, is it just...
Okay.
Mine's vanilla.
It must be the King James version.
Brenda, what is yours?
Okay, mine is, it's just the Christian Standard Bible, but all of these colors mean, like, one color is salvation, one's God, one's family, one's love.
Okay.
And some of them, they're
Oh, I can see.
similar. It's,
Yeah.
It's all these things at the bottom.
But y'all's isn't the same. You're just
No.
happens to be very
That's
colorful.
King James version.
Okay.
And for me, it's easy to read because I can see it well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm being the sage, and there are some of the Proverbs that says, these are from the sage. So I picked one of those, 24:16. Now,
Give us a minute.
your Bible probably doesn't say that, but mine says, a selection from the sages.
That is, so there is different collections of Proverbs,
Uh-huh.
and later in Proverbs it starts the ones from the sages. They're the oldest Proverbs.
Oh, okay, well, that's why I picked one, because that's
Which
my
one
name.
did you pick?
24:16.
24, 16.
Mine.
For though they fall 7 times, they will rise again.
Yeah, for though the upright fall 7 times, he gets up again. And the wicked are the ones who stumble in adversity. So pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and start all over again.
Does anyone else have a proverb that they'd want to share?
I kind of like chapter 1, verse 7. I'm easy to get it, first page.
What is that one?
It's the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. But fools despise wisdom. Verse 7, chapter 1. But fools despise wisdom. And it's right. Oh,
And I was surprised that chapter 15 through 19 is the story of the Exodus.
Really?
yeah. Look again.
I might not have noticed that. In Proverbs?
Yep.
15.
It is the story of Exodus, chapter 15.
Oh, I'm sorry. Wisdom 15 through 19.
Oh, the wisdom of Solomon.
Wisdom 15
Okay.
through 19.
I don't have that one in this Bible.
Oh,
The Wisdom of Solomon is a deuterocanonical book that is also one of the big wisdom literature books. But in Protestant Bibles, it might not be in your Bible. Though interestingly, the book of Romans that Paul writes quotes a lot, and primarily from the Wisdom of Solomon.
well, anyway, in Wisdom 15 through 19, it's the whole story of the Exodus.
Well, I thought you meant Proverbs, and I was like, what? I've never heard that one before, so I'm glad I wasn't as surprised as I thought it was. I was like, I've missed that. I was like, this is cool. I'm going to have to look into that. So I want to look at the Proverbs today. The Proverbs are a book. They are one of the books that make up the wisdom books. And I'll explain that in just a moment. And so we are going to look at the video that's going to illustrate this in Proverbs together. And then I'm also going to play an excerpt from another video. I think we're only watching 3 minutes of it, but it will show us the different sections. So like you just brought up about the part about the sages. This is something I may have learned before, but I didn't know it until getting my notes together for this week, that there's 6 different sections in Proverbs. And there are different collections of different Proverbs, which I think is really, really cool. So this is just a picture of the book of Proverbs. So wisdom literature is a particular type of literature. And it is special to the ancient Near East, though it's not unique. So the ancient Near East is that part of the world from Egypt to Mesopotamia, including Palestine and all through there. We call that the ancient Near East. Or it's the Near East, and we talk about the past, that's the ancient Near East. And wisdom literature was a big deal in the ancient Near East. So throughout all of the world, by like the 1200 BCE, wisdom literature had taken off. But in the ancient Near East, we have it from way back in the 3000s. And so it was something that was very prominent, and a lot of cultures would share their different types of wisdom literature and would build off of each other and copy one another. We're not going to look at these today, but if you wanted to look up the Egyptian instructions of that guy, or the Mesopotamian instructions of Shurupapak, or something like that, those are very, very popular accounts. And sometimes, there's a lot of other Egyptian and Mesopotamian ones. But sometimes, and especially in these ones, they'll look like our book of Proverbs. But wisdom literature can be a lot more. So actually, parables are a type of wisdom literature. A lot of the Psalms are types of wisdom literature. The book of Job, which is just a story, is wisdom literature. So it can take a lot of different forms for wisdom literature. Most popular maybe would be a proverb or a parable, but it can be more than that. And the key themes that are going to be in wisdom literature, particularly in the ancient Near East, is a fear of the divine. Maybe not fear and scared, but like this respect for the divine and divine power. Moral and ethic conduct, the value of humility, pursuit of knowledge, and reflecting on the human condition. And one thing that you'll notice as well with wisdom literature is that it is not just about knowledge and being smart. And it's not just about being a good person. Sometimes it's just very practical knowledge. I think this one is Egyptian, but there is two main traditions of these wisdom collections. And one of them is about being smart and living a good life, and the other is about being a farmer. And they are both held in equal esteem. And if you read through the Proverbs, you'll kind of see that same idea reflected. It can be very, very practical as well as out there and philosophical. These are the main wisdom books. So Psalms, Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, Job, and Song of Songs. And so for Hebrew literature, wisdom is more than just applied knowledge. It is a way of life itself. So when the Psalms begin, if you remember, we talked about that tree that's planted by streams of water. Well, that's later, different psalm. There's two ways of life. We get this idea that wisdom is a whole way of life itself. And it's a way of life that you're living in community together, in peace with your community together. You're living in peace with God. You're connected to the traditions of your ancestors. But you're also well off, kind of, when you live.
I'm not familiar with the Song of Songs.
Song of Solomon.
That's what I'm calling it. Song of Solomon. It says Songs.
It has multiple names for
I've
it.
never heard
I didn't
of
know
it.
that.
Yeah, Song of Solomon.
Alexander, is a Song of Songs part of the liturgy that is read every so often from the pulpit?
So actually, interestingly, do we have it in our lectionary? I am not sure if it's in our lectionary. There is, like in the wedding readings, some of the Song of Solomon will come up. But for Jews, you had to be a 13-year-old male to read it.
Oh, well, I mean, it's a little bit.
It's raunchy. It's pretty erotic.
If it's read from the pulpit.
Yeah. I feel like there might be a small segment that might come from it, but I'm not sure. The other thing to know about wisdom literature is I'll describe it as it's introducing you and inviting you to a conversation. So one thing you'll notice about Proverbs, they will sometimes contradict each other, and they'll be right beside each other, like two verses right beside each other that will say the opposite. So for example, there was a young Alexander, and I started to hang out with this older guy at church, and I would go and get lunch or breakfast with him and stuff. And my parents, particularly my mom, didn't like something that she thought he was influencing me. So my mom quoted a proverb and was like, well, the Bible says not to have many instructors because you'll get conflicting knowledge. I was like, the Proverbs also say to make sure you have many instructors, many mentors, so you're not just getting one side. And they're both Proverbs, and they're both there. So a proverb or wisdom literature is not to stand by itself. It's to invite you into the conversation, into the wisdom life, the way of thinking, being more intentional.
Why was the book of wisdom left out? Do you know?
Because it was written in Greek and not Hebrew. And so the Bible that Protestants inherited because of the printing press and expenses did not include the Greek books.
Okay.
So in the Episcopal Church, we still have it in our canon, but not for doctrine, for instruction and other things. So it's the Deuterocanonical, the second books, or the apocryphal books. But it was written in Greek instead of Hebrew.
Okay.
Now, were all of you here when we did our lesson on the Psalms a few months ago? So I made this chart about the Psalms, which this might be a little hard to see, but this was something I had printed out. And the reason I'm bringing this up, you can ignore all of this. We're not going to bring it up. But there was a way I introduced how we look at the Psalms, and that is orientation, disorientation, and new orientation. So there are lots of ways that you can classify Psalms. Some people like to do it lament, confession, praise, or classifications like that. My favorite is with these three: orientation, disorientation, and a new orientation. And the reason I like to teach the Psalms like that, because if we can get in our mind about thinking in the Psalms in that way, we will suddenly be able to understand the wisdom books a lot more. And so what we talked about with the Psalms, they go through this pattern. They'll start off with orientation. People live in the world and the world makes sense. People live with an understanding of God, and it's very simple, and they're praising God. They're like, thank you for such my good, my perfect life. But the Psalms don't stop there. Sometimes the Psalms go through disorientation. And that is the one where the psalmist is very angry. So some of the Psalms are calling for their enemies, for their babies' heads to be dashed against rocks. And you read that and you're like, why would that be in our Bible? Well, because it's an expression of emotion. It's this disorientation. The way they've understood the world has fallen apart, and all they're left with is anger or sadness. And so that's disorientation. But the Psalms don't stop there either. They always lead us into new orientation. And that is a new understanding of God. And we're not the same, but we have grown. And the Psalms will go through that kind of tempo. And you need all three. You start off here. There's a disorientation, something wrong has happened. And then there's new orientation. You have grown and you have a new understanding about life and about God. Does that make sense? Okay, I really love looking at the Psalms this way, and it's going to help us when we look at the wisdom books. This is the same thing. So orientation, praise the Lord, God is great. Disorientation, we're crying out to God, something bad has happened. And then you have reorientation or new orientation. You're still praising God, but now there's like a new explanation for why you praise God. So when we come to the wisdom books, the three main ones are Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. And what's really cool about Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job is Proverbs is like orientation. So Proverbs are very, very simple. It's a simple level of wisdom. When you read the Proverbs, it tells you save up extra grain so that when winter comes, you'll still have extra food. It makes fun of the sluggard a lot because he is helpless. But it praises the person who works and saves up and is prudent. It's very, very simple like that. And that's all really good advice. But life doesn't always work out that way. And so Ecclesiastes is like disorientation. Ecclesiastes, everything's meaningless. Everything is kind of fallen apart. And at Job, we're going to come into... Sorry, those are backwards. Job is disorientation. Everything has fallen apart. And then Ecclesiastes is this reorientation. And one way that Jews would talk about these three books, Proverbs is like a young man. Happy-go-lucky, looking forward, life is hopeful, anything is within your reach and you can attain it. Job is like someone having a midlife crisis. They lost their job, 2008 hit, they lost their house, everything has fallen apart, and there's no answers. And when we'll come to Job, there's no answers in Job. Everything's kind of sad. And then Ecclesiastes is like an old man looking back on everything and seeing the true meaning of everything. Does that make sense with looking at these? Okay. I like explaining the wisdom books this way because it helps me understand them better. Because when I look at Proverbs in this very simple level of knowledge, it's good advice, it's good things to keep in mind, but it doesn't answer all of life's problems. Same thing when I get to Job. When I read Job and Job by itself, which, by the way, is one of the most quoted whole books in the whole Bible, is Job. Even in secular universities, they will look at Job because it's a very powerful piece of literature. It's a very powerful story. There's other stories like Job, and I don't think we're going to look at this in here, but there is Mesopotamian versions of Job that were centuries before where the same kind of things happened. And this is like the Jewish version of that story. It's a powerful story. But there's no answer in Job. Like, Job's life falls apart. He has 3 friends that come and give bad advice. And then God comes in and says, Who are you, Job? I'm God. And that's just how the book ends. Like, there's no answer. Everything has fallen apart, and there's no resolution to it, except you are Job and I am God. Like, that's the only thing you get. And that doesn't finish the conversation. Ecclesiastes helps us kind of finish these conversations together with what is like that true meaning of life. But they're different conversations, and it's good to read them all together, which is why the hope is that when we look at the wisdom books, we remember all 3. Not just Proverbs, not just Job, not just Ecclesiastes, but all 3. Does that make sense? Okay,
Yeah.
Great. Okay, this is a short little video that I thought this was really fascinating. This is looking at the different sections of Proverbs. There's about 3 minutes of it that we're going to watch. Would you like to watch this? Okay. This is one I really want to show you. 7:16. That's where I need to go. So this is from Useful Charts, which is where I buy all my charts from. So he grew up Christian, and then he is now Jewish, and he has his PhD in religion. And he has a whole series called Who Wrote the Bible that you can go and watch. So this is an excerpt of one of those. I think my computer is not playing sound through the TV.
Solely on faith, and which are based on verifiable history. Okay, next up is the book of Proverbs. It too is not really a single book, but rather a collection of texts written by different people during different time periods. Basically, it can be divided into 6 sections. Although the book begins with the phrase, the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, most scholars believe that the first 9 chapters are actually a prologue, probably added during the Persian period. This initial section consists of 15 separate poems dealing with specific topics. The word proverb refers to a short, wise saying, and therefore the Proverbs section of the book doesn't actually start until chapter 10. That's where we start getting the one-liner bits of wisdom. This section goes until chapter 22, verse 17, and likely represents the original core of the book, perhaps written by Solomon himself, or perhaps attributed to Solomon as a means of establishing authority. Either way, sections 3 and 4 are not associated with Solomon. Section 3 begins with the phrase, "Listen to the words of the sages," and goes on to tell 30 wise sayings. And section 4 begins with, "These are also by the sages," and includes 5 more. The interesting thing about section 3 is that a good portion of it seems to correspond directly with a work of ancient Egyptian literature. known as the Instruction of Amen M. Opet, which dates to around 1000 BCE. So it seems that the ancient Israelites recognized this Egyptian work as being important and decided to incorporate it alongside the words of their own people. Moving on, section 5 starts with, "These are more Proverbs of Solomon, compiled by the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah." So these are perhaps later additions, attributed to Solomon, but written during the reign of King Hezekiah. Finally, in section 6, we get 3 final poems. One by Agur, son of Jakeh, from Massa, one written by Lemuel, the king of Massa, and the final one being anonymous. As to whether the kingdom of Massa was a real place or a fictional creation, no one is really sure. So, like Psalms, because
So I thought that was really cool to look at the different segments of Proverbs. And if you'll look on your chart from the Bible Project, it even has that first 9 chapters there as the introduction of books. And then the next main section, 10 through 29, these are the ones that we actually think of as the Proverbs. So that includes the Proverbs of Solomon and the Proverbs from the sages. And then the last 2 ones are these extra ones that kind of make up the end of the book, including 31 with Lady Wisdom, who's there in the middle of that little block. I think that's really cool. It was a new way of I don't know, I maybe have heard this before because I've watched this series as it came out, but I had forgotten about it. So I thought that was informative and interesting. And it does help you as you read the Proverbs. The ones that we think of as Proverbs, it's 10 through 29. And yeah, for some reason, I didn't realize that. So the next video that I wanted to show you is the animated version of this. And this one's from the Bible Project. Before we look at that, any questions or comments? Okay.
The book of Proverbs. The word proverb typically refers to a short, clever saying that offers some kind of wisdom, and this book has a lot of those. But they're almost all in the center section of the book, chapters 10 to 29. But there is way more going on in the book of Proverbs, especially at the beginning, chapters 1 through 9, and the conclusion, chapters 30 and 31. The book's been designed with an introduction, chapter 1, verses 1 through 9, and it first of all links this book to King Solomon. Now remember the story in 1 Kings chapter 3. Solomon had asked God for wisdom to lead Israel well. And so Solomon became known as the wisest man in the ancient world. And we're told in 1 Kings chapter 4 that he wrote thousands of proverbs and poems and collected knowledge about plants and animals. So Solomon was like the fountainhead of Israel's wisdom literature. So while not all the material in this book is written by him personally, he is where Israel's wisdom tradition began. The introduction says that by reading this book, you too can gain wisdom. Now, wisdom for most of us means knowledge, but the Hebrew word chokhmah means much more than just mental activity. It refers to action also. So think skill or applied knowledge. This is why back in the book of Exodus, chapter 31, it was artists and craftsmen in Israel who were said to have chokhmah. So the purpose of this book is to help you develop a set of practical skills for living well in God's world. And this gets linked with another key idea in the introduction, the fear of the Lord. Now, fear here is not about terror. It's about a healthy sense of reverence and awe for God and about my place in the universe. It's a moral mindset that recognizes I am not God and that I don't get to make up my own definitions of good and evil and right and wrong. Rather, I need to humble myself before God and embrace God's definition of right and wrong, even when that's inconvenient for me. Now, this introduction leads us into the first main section of the book, chapters 1 through 9, which also doesn't contain short one-liner proverbs. Rather, what we find here are 10 speeches from a father to a son about how the son should listen to wisdom and cultivate the fear of the Lord and live accordingly, which means a life of virtue and integrity and generosity, all of which lead to success and peace. The father warns his son also about folly and evil and stupid decisions that will breed selfishness and pride, all leading to ruin and shame. And so the son should make the pursuit of wisdom and the fear of the Lord his highest goal in life. And this way of thinking, it forms the moral logic of this entire book. Now, these speeches from the father also clue us into what biblical wisdom literature is and how it's different from other parts of the Bible. These books explore how to live well in God's world, but wisdom is not the same as law, like what Moses gave Israel at Mount Sinai. And it's not the same as prophecy, divine speech to God's people. Rather, wisdom literature has the accumulated insight of God's people through the generations about how to live in a way that honors God and others. And so, through the book of Proverbs now, these human words about wisdom have been put together as God's word and wisdom to his people, which connects to the other thing you find in chapters 1 through 9. There are 4 poems from Lady Wisdom. Here, wisdom has been poetically personified as a woman who calls out to humanity to pay attention and to seek her. Wisdom says that she is woven into the fabric of the universe, and so wherever you see people making wise decisions, they are relying on her. So you see someone being generous or having sexual integrity or upholding justice. They are drawing on wisdom. These Lady Wisdom poems, they're a creative, poetic way of exploring this idea that we live in God's moral universe, and that goodness and justice are objective realities that we ignore to our own peril. And so fearing the Lord, living wisely, it's living along the grain of the universe. Now together, these 2 sets of speeches from the Father and Lady Wisdom, they make a powerful claim about this book, that you're not simply reading good advice, you're reading God's own invitation to learn wisdom from previous generations. And so in the next section of the book, chapters 10 through 29, we find hundreds of ancient proverbs, and they apply wisdom and the fear of the Lord to every life topic you could imagine: family, work, neighborhood, friendship, sex, marriage, money, anger, forgiveness, alcohol, debt, everything. And these are all filtered through the value system of Proverbs 1 through 9. Now, these Proverbs, they're all pretty short, they're easy to memorize, and actually this section of the book is meant to become a reference work that you return to time and time again throughout the years, which raises some important issues in learning how to read these Proverbs. First of all, Proverbs are by nature about probabilities. So you fear the Lord and you make wise, good choices, things will likely go well for you. And if you don't fear the Lord, you're foolish, your life will likely not go so well. Now, that is all often true, but not always. Which leads to the next point, that Proverbs are not promises. They're not formulas for success. So, some Proverbs, for example. The fear of the Lord prolongs your life, but the years of the wicked are cut short. Or, train up a child in the way they should go, and when they're old, they won't turn from it. So yes, fearing God, being a moral person, will most likely lead to a better, longer life, and raising your kids in a stable, loving home does set them up well, but there are no guarantees. Lots of things can and often do go wrong in our world. And so lastly, Proverbs by nature focus on the general rule, but not the exceptions, which are many. And the wisdom books actually aren't ignorant of that. The exceptions are what the other wisdom books, Job and Ecclesiastes, are all about. And together, these acknowledge that life is too complex for simple formulas, which is why we need all of the wisdom books together to get the bigger picture. This all leads to the final section of the book, 2 large collections of poems. First, poems from a man named Agur, who begins by acknowledging his own ignorance and folly and his great need for God's wisdom. And then Agur discovers that divine wisdom has been given to him in the scriptures, which teach him how to live well. And so Agur is put before us as like a model reader of the book of Proverbs, somebody who's always open to hearing God's wisdom through the scriptures. The final poems are connected to a man named Lemuel. He's a non-Israelite king, and he passes on the wisdom that was given to him by his mom. It's guidance for being a wise and just leader. And then the final poem is an acrostic or an alphabet poem, where each line begins with a new letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And the entire poem's about the woman of noble character. It depicts a woman who lives according to the wisdom of Proverbs and stands like a model of someone who takes God's wisdom and then translates it into practical decisions in everyday life, at work or at home, in her family and in her community. So the book opened with words from a father to a son about listening to Lady Wisdom, and so now the book closes by offering the words of a mother to her son about a woman who lives wisely. The book of Proverbs is for every person in every season of life. It's a guide for living wisely and well in God's good world. And that's what the book of Proverbs is all about.
Pretty cool, isn't it?
That's good.
So I hope looking at that puts new ways of looking at the Proverbs. I know it does for me. When I was younger, I read the Proverbs a lot, but I don't feel like they made as much sense until I was older and could at least see it as part of this conversation that's taking place and an invitation for us to kind of jump into the wisdom books. After watching these videos, any thoughts or reflections? Oh. Oops. Was there any parts of it that stood out to you?
Makes sense.
Which with the
Well, all of it. Not all the Bible makes sense to me, but this seems like it makes sense because it's a progression.
This video here is the start of a series on the wisdom books, so Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and Job. In the next video I want to look at, it's still looking at Proverbs, but it's more of a thematic look instead of a summary, going like section by section. I have 2 more of these summary videos that we might not look at today, but it includes Job and Ecclesiastes. I did want to start the Job one, but would y'all want to look at these?
Yes.
Okay.
Sure.
There are 3 books in the Bible that have come to be called the wisdom literature: Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job.
And all these books are addressing the same set of questions. What kind of world are we living in? And what does it look like to live well in this world?
So, how to be good at life.
Yeah. So each of these books tackles these questions from a unique perspective, and it's important to understand all of them to get a fully biblical perspective on the good life. So as a thought experiment, you could actually imagine each of these books as a person. So Proverbs would be like this brilliant young teacher, and Ecclesiastes the sharp middle-aged critic, and Job would be this weathered old man who's seen a lot in his day.
We're going to start by meeting the book of Proverbs, the brilliant young teacher. And she's not just smart, she's smart about everything: work, relationships, sex, spirituality. She has incredible insights, things you wouldn't see on your own.
Yeah, she would be the perfect friend to have around when you need really specific advice.
So what makes her so smart?
Well, Proverbs can see things that most people don't see. She believes that there's an invisible creative force in the universe that can guide people in how they should live. And you can't see it, just like you can't see gravity, but it affects everything that we do.
So what's this force?
Well, in Hebrew, it's called chokhmah, and it usually gets translated into English as wisdom. It's an attribute of God that God used to create the world. And chokhmah has been woven into the fabric of things and how they work. So wherever people are making good or just or wise decisions, they're tapping into chokhmah.
And whenever someone's making a bad decision, they're working against Hokmah.
Right, or as it says in Proverbs chapter 1, the waywardness of fools will destroy them, but the one who listens to wisdom lives in security.
So it's like a moral law of the universe.
Yeah, it's a cause-effect pattern, and no one can escape it. And Proverbs personifies all of this as a woman.
Yeah, Lady Wisdom.
Right, and she roams around the earth, calling out, making herself available to anyone who's willing to listen to her and to learn. Which leads to the second thing Proverbs believes, that anyone can access and interact with wisdom and use it to make a beautiful life for yourself or for others.
You can create with it like a designer.
Yes, in fact, chokhmah in Hebrew isn't simply intellectual knowledge. The word is also used to describe a skilled artisan who excels at their craft, like woodworking or stonemasonry. So you show you possess chokhmah when you put it to work and develop the skill of making a good life.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's do this. Let's go find some wisdom.
But before you do, Proverbs has one more really important thing to consider. Chokhmah isn't some impersonal force. It's an attribute of God himself. And so in Hebrew thought, your journey to becoming wise has to begin with what Proverbs calls the fear of the Lord. It's this healthy respect for God's definition of good and evil. And true wisdom means learning those boundary lines and not crossing them.
Now, all those ideas you just unpacked are in chapters 1 through 9 in Proverbs. But when I think of the book of Proverbs, I think of the collection of sayings, the Proverbs themselves. Tell me about those.
Yeah, those are what you find in chapters 10 on to the end of the book. It's a collection of hundreds and hundreds of proverbs about any and all aspects of life. And chokhmah gets applied to them, resulting in this wise guidance to help you find a path towards success, and no matter what you do.
If I design my life with these sayings, life is going to be good.
Yeah, or as Proverbs puts it, it'll give health to your bones, prosperity, a long, rich life.
Which is a really big claim.
But you can see how it's often the case. Wise people, they tend to do better. Things usually work out well for them in life. And so that is the promise and the wisdom of the book of Proverbs.
The book of Proverbs is really beautiful. But if we take a step back, some people would argue it's a little too simplistic. Because sometimes horrible things happen to really wise people, and sometimes foolish people get rewarded. It doesn't always work the way we think it should work.
That's right. Which is why we need to go and listen to our next wise friend, Ecclesiastes the critic. Because he's wrestled with that very problem, and he's going to push us further in our journey to find the good life. Hey you guys, thank you for watching the Bible Project. You can find a lot more videos like this one on our YouTube channel.
We believe the Bible is a unified story. It all leads to Jesus and has profound...
I got stuck. Okay. I like this animated overview of them, and they have one for each of the books that are supposed to kind of go together. Sorry, I had to step out. The printer got jammed, and they needed help trying to get a piece of paper out that got stuck up inside of it.
So is it, we can go to the YouTube channel and just put in the Bible Project?
Yes, and I think I'm going to put the link to all of these series. The next one I have in here is the one about Ecclesiastes, but I really like the Job one. So would you like to watch this one together while we're in here?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. This one is my favorite, but I really like the book of Job. And so as an aside, just before we come in, the book of Job is a very popular book. And it's a book that covers a topic we call theodicy. So theodicy is that word that's the justice of God. And so in a lot of literature classes, they will look at the book of Job together. The way that Job is written like a play. And so you can kind of imagine if you're reading Job, like, the spotlight starts off, there's a man sitting there and everything's falling apart. And then someone steps in and tells you what has kind of happened in the background. It really is written like a stage play. And so, and it's one that gets kind of emotional. And there's 3 friends that come up and they give horrible advice. And they're trying to explain to Job why all of these bad things have happened. And this video ends with there's no explanation given. And so Job is one of those special books. But it's one that you should never open up and just randomly start reading it for advice. Like Proverbs, you could open up anywhere and it's going to give you good advice. Most of Job is bad advice because it's the friends talking. And so they're also kind of having a conversation together. The other part when you read Job is there is a figure called Hasatan, which is what the Hebrew is. It's the Satan or the accuser. And he is part of the divine counsel of God. That reflects in older Jewish thought kind of about Satan, which is that Satan wasn't this figure against God, which is a very Greek idea, that there's a good and evil force. It's reflecting the idea that God has everything and there's a council ruling under God, and so there's an accuser working for God, almost like that death angel that we saw in Exodus. that you're like, hey, wait, isn't that a bad person? But they're kind of working as an agent of God. If we have questions about that, we can talk about it after, but I just wanted to say that before we look at it.
There are 3 books in the Bible known as the wisdom literature: Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. The first, Proverbs, showed us that God is wise and just.
Yeah, we learned that God has ordered the world so that it's fair. The righteous are rewarded, the wicked are punished. In other words, you get what you deserve.
But then we meet Ecclesiastes, who observes, people don't always get what they deserve.
Yeah, he said the world isn't always fair, that life is unpredictable and hard to comprehend, just like smoke.
And this makes you wonder, okay, well, is God wise and just?
Exactly. And so it's that question that is being explored in the final book of wisdom, Job.
All right, let's dive in.
So Job begins with a strange story that takes place up in the heavens, which are described something like a heavenly command center. So God is there with these angelic creatures called the sons of God, and they're all there reporting for duty.
And God points out this guy Job, his servant, showing how righteous and good he is.
And then one of these angelic creatures approaches. He's referred to in Hebrew as the Satan.
The Satan? Who is this?
Well, this word is actually a title, which literally means the one who is opposed. So out of this whole crew, he is the one questioning how God is running the world. And he proposes that Job might not actually love God, that he's only a good person because God rewards him. If God were to take away all of the good things he gave to Job, then we would see his true colors.
So he thinks Job is just working the system?
That's exactly right. Maybe he's obeying just to get what he wants.
So God agrees to this experiment and allows the Satan to inflict suffering on Job.
And Job loses everyone and everything that he cares about. It is devastating. And remember, he deserves none of this. God himself said so.
The remarkable thing is that in the midst of all this suffering, Job still praises God.
At least for chapters 1 and 2. But then in chapter 3, we find out how he's really feeling inside. He unleashes this poem that reveals his devastation. It's a long, elaborate curse on the day that he was born.
After this, some of Job's friends come to visit him to offer their help. And all of them are like, Job, you must have done something horribly wrong to deserve this. After all, we know God is just, and we know the world is ordered by God's justice and fairness, so you must be getting what you deserve.
And for the next 34 chapters, the friends and Job go back and forth in very dense Hebrew poetry. His friends keep speculating about why God might have sent such suffering, and they even start making up lists of hypothetical sins that Job must have committed. But after each accusation, Job defends his innocence.
And Job is innocent.
He is. He's also on an emotional roller coaster. At some moments, he's very confident that God is still wise and just.
Yeah, in other moments, he's doubting God's goodness.
He even comes to accuse God of being reckless, unfair, and corrupt. So by the end of the dialogue, Job demands that God come and explain himself in person. And God does so. He comes in the form of a great storm cloud.
Now, God doesn't give Job a direct answer. He doesn't tell Job about the conversation with the Satan.
Yeah, he does something very different. He takes Job on a virtual tour of the universe. He shows Job how grand the world is, and he asks him if he's even capable of running it or understanding it, just for a day. He shows Job how much detail there is in the world, things that we might see every day, but really don't understand at all. But God does. He knows it all intimately. He pays attention to the beauty and operations of the universe in ways that we haven't even imagined and in places that we will never see.
Then to conclude, God shows Job 2 wondrous beasts and brags about how great they are.
Yeah, they are dangerous. I mean, they would kill you without even thinking about it. And God says they're not evil. They're actually a part of his good world.
And then that's it. That's God's whole defense. It's kind of weird. I mean, what was this all about?
It seems to be this. From Job's point of view, it looks like God is not just. But God's perspective is infinitely bigger. He's dynamically interacting with a whole universe of complexity when he makes decisions. And this is what God calls his wisdom.
So Job asking God to defend himself is actually kind of absurd.
He couldn't comprehend this kind of complexity even if he wanted to.
So where does this leave us?
Well, it leaves Job in a place of humility. He never learned why he suffered, and yet he's able to live in peace and in the fear of the Lord.
But
Oh.
that's not where the book ends, because after this, God restores to Job double everything he had lost. And this, again, is surprising. I mean, is this a reward? Is God saying, congratulations, Job, you passed this elaborate test?
No, I mean, the whole book just made the point that Job losing everything was not a punishment, and so now getting it back isn't a reward.
So why does he get it back?
Well, apparently, God, in his wisdom, decided to give Job a gift. We don't know why. But what we do know is that Job is now the kind of person who, no matter what comes, good or bad, he can trust God's wisdom.
And that's the book of Job, and the end of our wisdom series.
These biblical books of wisdom are amazing. Each one offers a unique perspective on the good life, and you need to hear all of them together as you learn to live with wisdom and in the fear of the Lord. Here you go.
So I really love the book of Job. Sometimes when I'm in life and I think about all the big problems in the world or my own problems and they feel really big and I don't get it. And I'm always reminded of Job because to me it helps me put into the perspective, as crude as it sounds, but like I don't understand what's going on with an ant in an ant world, but its world, like it thinks its anthill is everything. And I walk by in my own world and it's a lot bigger than that ant's world. And it helps me put into perspective, not that human life or my life is not important, but there are bigger things going on than just me. And then I think about my high schoolers, that there's this one of our youth that every few weeks has like this major issue with like a boyfriend or something. I don't know what it is, but is so upset. And it takes up like 20 minutes of conversation and it's so devastating every few weeks. And to me, it's funny because it's so small. But to her, it's the biggest deal that there is. And Job, for me, helps me put those things into perspective. Kind of like we talked about when you go to fish, and it's like this zoom out. Wow, we might not have as hard of a life as we thought we did. I love Job because of that. Ecclesiastes is also a good book, but for me, Proverbs and Job balance each other out and kind of looking at things. But my hope is, in our kind of zoomed overview of looking at the wisdom books, when you come and think about wisdom, think of it as this conversation and an invitation for you to join into that conversation. Thinking about the good life, thinking about living prudently, but also a way of living faithfully in God's world. And that includes caring for it and for other people. I think that's what's special about the wisdom books. A lot of the proverbs that we have are not unique proverbs. They're just good practical advice. But it's just the starting step. And hopefully you get to finish that conversation. That's the wisdom books.
Well, they're interesting. I never understood any of that before.
Of all of the wisdom books?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, they're fun to read all together. And there's more